Hello everyone. I actually promised to make a video like this a while back, but I've always been nothing if not fashionably late, or at the very least just plain late. But today I want to talk a little bit about the damage calculations in the game. Now this is commonly associated with another question about the game, which is basically, what's the difference between attack and damage? I think the easiest way for me to explain this going forward is for me to simply put the basic damage formula of the game on screen. So you can take a look right here. Now this is obviously a very simplified version of the damage formula in the game, because there are many things that can affect your attack, there are many things that can affect your defense, and there are quite a few things that will affect your damage multiplier as well. Now I know some of you might already be groaning and being like, I don't want to memorize a math equation for this game. So for what it's worth, I'm generally pretty lazy myself, and I usually don't go out of my way to memorize math formulas for playing video games. Rather, I would say that as you play the game more, you'll sort of intuitively understand this formula, and hopefully by explaining some of the damage calculations in this video, I can help you start getting there. So why don't we start by simplifying this even more and start with the most basic piece of the equation: attack minus defense over 2. This is a simplified way to calculate the damage of each individual hit your hero or soldier will do to a given target. I should note that this is only accurate for most heroes and most soldiers. The more accurate equation would actually be attack minus defense times 10 for your total damage. The reason it gets simplified to attack minus defense over 2 for each individual hit for most units is because most units, most heroes, and most soldiers will attack 20 times. So since the basic damage you do in this game is attack minus defense times 10, obviously spread across 20 hits, that's attack minus defense over 2. However, it should be noted that there are a couple key exceptions in this game that do not attack 20 times, and they'll instead spread that attack minus defense times 10 damage over a smaller number of hits. The most well-known example of this is Juggler's Hydra class, which only attacks 7 times. So since Juggler does less attacks when he's in Hydra class, each attack actually does more damage than a typical attack, since it's spread out less. But this can have a number of disadvantages, like for example, he can overkill soldiers and then waste a lot of damage. But aside from this one key exception, almost every single hero and soldier in the game will spread their attack across 20 hits. So for the purposes of this video going forward, I'm going to stick with attack minus defense divided by 2. I just felt the need to note that real quick before I go on, because it is a pretty important thing to remember when you go calculate things like Juggler's damage. So here I'm going to have a pretty simple example. Altina is going to be my little assistant here. Altina, of course, is magic damage, so instead I'm going to be looking at intelligence and magic defense here instead of attack and defense. But the formula is the same either way, you just use different numbers. Altina doesn't have an intelligence or damage boosting talent. She doesn't have a heart bond in this case, and I'm not really wearing anything other than a blue moon to boost her intelligence. I've also equipped melee soldiers on her, so she's going to be the only one attacking here, just to keep the screen not too cluttered. So basically this is going to come down to a very simple intelligence to magic defense comparison. As you can see here, Altina has 581 intelligence, and the soldiers she's going to be hitting here have 282 plus 112 magic defense. If we plug those numbers into the equation, we can see that she's supposed to be doing 93 damage per hit. So let's check if we're right here. And as you can see, Altina did 93 damage, as we expected. So now we have the basic equation down. Why don't we try it with an attack skill this time? So I'm going to use Lightning with Altina. She's going to have the same stats, so basically this time, the only thing that should change is that she does 1.5 times damage due to using Lightning. We should be expecting 140 damage as a result of this. And that's exactly what we got. Alright, why don't we try adding some damage to the equation now? This time I'm going to be equipping a level 50 Pale Staff on Altina and casting Lightning. The Pale Staff increases Altina's damage by 15% when using a single target skill. So we can see that this time Altina has 550 intelligence. So if we plug those numbers into the equation, we should be able to get around 135 damage as the expected output here. So now let's see if our calculations are right. And once again, what we calculated is exactly what we got. So now let's go back to the original extended equation and make some conclusions based off of the equation. So one conclusion we can immediately draw here is that In this game, you compare your attack or your intelligence against the enemy's defense or magic defense for your basic damage. So what this means is that if your attack or intelligence is lower or equal to the enemy's defense or magic defense, you're going to be doing 0 damage no matter what you do. You could have plus 1,000,000% damage or whatever, and you're still going to be doing 0 damage because your attack or intelligence is lower than your defensive stats. And even though I said 0 damage, what I actually mean is that you're probably going to be doing 20 damage because the minimum amount of damage in this game is actually 1 damage, and you attack 20 times, so usually you're going to do 20 damage. And of course you'll notice that it multiplies by the damage mod, so this means that the opposite is also true. No matter how high your attack and intelligence is, if your enemy has 100% damage reduction, you're going to be doing 0 damage every single time if you don't have any damage mods of your own. This is why, for example, Liana with Shrine Maidens is incredibly tanky, especially against heroes that only have attack boost and no damage boost. The Shrine Maidens reduce the amount of damage Liana takes significantly. And if you don't have a lot of damage boost to compensate for the fact that Liana has all this damage reduction, then you're going to be doing very little damage to her. This is also why when you are attacking a Liana with Shrine Maidens, if you use something like, say, Leon with Assault, which increases his damage by 60%, it's actually going to do more damage to Liana than something like 1,000 Hooves from Leon, which is a 1.7 times multiplier attack, but actually offers no damage boost. The other thing I want to note here is that damage boosts in this game are usually added and subtracted from each other, rather than being multiplied from each other. So what I mean by that is that if I'm hitting a Liana with Shrine Maidens that reduce her damage taken by, say, 75%, and I'm attacking her with Attack Blessing, like 30%, the final damage I'm going to do is not damage times 1.3 times 0.25. You actually would take the 30% Attack Blessing and subtract that from the 75% damage reduction that the Shrine Maidens gave, and instead you would multiply your final damage by 0.55. This applies to the majority of damage mods in this game, but there are actually a number of exceptions. Hero talents are one of the most notable exceptions to this. For some reason, hero talent damage reduction is multiplied separately from all the other damage mods, so we're going to see that going forward. And another thing is that, for example, Tyr's Helm, or Fury of Tyr rather, actually is a separate clause from all the other damage boosts. Possibly because it's skill damage instead of just damage, but whatever the case, it's multiplied separately. So before we move on and do a more complicated calculation, here are some other exceptions or strange rules that I feel the need to point out. So number 1, terrain defense bonuses are a defense bonus, but it is multiplied separately from other defense bonuses. So, for example, if you're standing in a forest and get 20% defense bonus, it is multiplied with a defense bonus you get from a talent, for example, even though the talent defense bonus would be added to, say, a faction buff defense bonus. Number 2, critical hits have a base bonus of 30% damage. As you can see, critical hits have their own part of the equation, and usually this is 1.3 times damage, and any addition or subtraction to this is added and subtracted on top of it rather than multiplied. So if you have plus 10% crit damage, you would instead multiply your entire result by 1.4 instead of 1.3. And number 3, the melee penalty factor that I've listed here is minus 70% damage, or in other words, you multiply your damage by 0.3 at the end if you are receiving the melee penalty. Alright, now that I've explained the equation, why don't we finish this off by doing a more complicated calculation and see if this formula actually works or not. So here you have Elwyn and his unicorns about ready to attack into a Vargas with Lava Titans. Elwyn's base attack is 578 plus 403, and the unicorn's base attack is 723 plus 253. Now, base attack actually means the number that you see on the status window in the hero barracks. This is also often referred to as pre-deploy stats, and they're actually very important because this is the stat where you use to calculate a lot of other multiplication factors. The pre-deploy stat is basically the hero's base stats, which is whatever the hero innately has, plus whatever stats you got from flat stats on your equipment, as well as the enchantment stats. This does not include the equipment ability bonus. For example, Elwyn is using an Errant Knight here. The flat attack and the enchantment from on the sword does affect his pre-deploy stat, but the plus 10% attack that is from its ability actually does not affect his pre-deploy stat. That does not get applied until after he deploys. So now that we have that cleared up, let's take a look at the Lava Titan's defensive stats. So now we know L1 and the Unicorn's base attack, and we know the Lava Titan's defensive stats. Before we start calculating, we gotta figure out what kind of bonuses the Unicorns and L1 are going to get. Let's start with the Unicorns. So I know I have L1 faction buffed here, so that means a plus 20% attack. The Unicorn ability is active because I have Lambda here providing a forest tile. That means another plus 30% attack on the Unicorns. I'm within 2 spaces of Lambda when attacking, so that means I'm actually activating the group charge ability from the training rounds, which is another plus 20% attack. I'm attacking into a guarded unit, so I am going to activate Rapid Rout from the cavalry training rounds, which is another plus 20% attack. However, I am at a class disadvantage, so I know I'm going to get a minus 30% attack. Now, class advantages and disadvantages are multiplied separately from all the other attack bonuses, so I'm going to reflect that in the equation. So as for damage, there's also a number of things to consider. First, I'm going to consider Vargas's talent. It actually does not factor in here because Vargas reduces physical damage, and Unicorns do magic damage. So when calculating the Unicorn's damage, Vargas's talent actually makes him take 1 times damage, which is just full damage. But as for the Unicorn's bonuses, we know that L1 gives 25% damage from his talent. I get 15% damage from L1's faction buff here. And finally, I am moving 4 blocks before attacking, which means I'm activating Fine Steel Hooves for 8% per block, which means 8 times 4, which equals 32% damage. So as you can see, I have a total of plus 90% attack, another minus 30% attack as a separate clause because of class disadvantage, and I have plus 72% damage from all these various damage sources. So let's plug all those numbers into the equation and see what we get. So we got 632 damage here. So before we watch the video and confirm our answer, let's do the calculation for L1 first. So I know L1 has an Errant Knight equipped, that's plus 10% attack. He has a Swordsmith medal, which is plus 5% attack. He has a faction buff, which is plus 20% attack. He has the Full Moon enchant, which gives him another plus 10% attack. The class at disadvantage, once again, is minus 30% attack. So in total here, I have a plus 45% attack bonus, and I'm going to be multiplying that by another 30% damage penalty due to class disadvantage. Now we can look at damage. Since L1 is a physical attacker, Vargas's talent is going to apply here, and this NPC Vargas has minus 22% physical damage as his talent. That's going to be a separate clause from the damage bonuses L1's going to get, as I mentioned earlier. So as far as L1's damage bonuses go, he has plus 25% damage from his talent. He has plus 15% damage from his faction buff, which is a total of 40% damage. He also has Fury of Tyr, boosting his Sword Soul damage by 10%. As I mentioned earlier, Fury of Tyr has a separate clause from the rest of the damage calculations, so that's going to be its own 1.1 times clause. And finally, we have Sword Soul, which makes L1 do 1.8 times damage, and that's going to be its own clause as well. So let's plug all those things in the equation and see what we get. It's 193 damage. So to review, we are expecting 632 damage from the Unicorns, and 193 damage from L1. Let's see if we were right or not. And as you can see, our calculations were correct. The Unicorn calculation was off by 1 point, but that's likely due to rounding errors. So why don't we finish this off by actually looking at Vargas's counterattack here. So we know Vargas's and the Lava Titan's attack, and we also know the Unicorn's base defense. We know Lancer gets a plus 30% attack bonus for class advantage, and now we can take a look at what kind of defense bonuses we have on L1. So first I know that L1's talent will give 25% defense when attacking. The faction buff gives him 20% defense. Group Charge is active, so I get plus 20% defense from that. Rapid Rout also gives me plus 20% defense. And because I'm on a forest tile due to Lambda, I'm actually getting a 20% defense boost. But remember that terrain boosts are separate from the other boosts, so this actually gets multiplied by its own separate 1.2 times multiplier. As for damage, I have high speed level 8 on my account, which means I get minus 15% damage. And there's one final thing that is actually very hard to remember, and that's L1's Heart Bond, which reduces the amount of damage the unit takes when attacking by 10%. So in total, I actually have a minus 25% damage here. So let's plug those things in the equation and see what we get. It looks like we got 81 damage from the Lava Titans to the Unicorn, and 235 damage from Vargas to the Unicorns. Let's see if we got that right. Alright, everything's looking good. So to recap, attack and damage are both pretty important in this game. When you really get down to it, the calculation is actually relatively simple to understand, although as you can see, the math can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. However, generally speaking, one easy thing you can do is to just compare your attack to the opponent's defense, and then try to think about what kind of damage mods you have, and you can actually get a pretty simplified calculation in your head, assuming you're good enough at arithmetic, of course. It's not that complicated, and hopefully this answered a couple questions you guys had about damage calculations in this game. This is a pretty basic overview of how damage works in this game, so if you guys have any other questions, be sure to ask them below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.